Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Hunger Hunt Feast. So apparently I had COVID. Who knew? Now, I want to preface this and say I'm not making light of the fact that so many people have died or have had long-term complications from COVID. I totally acknowledge this virus has torn through and revealed, in my opinion, a health crisis that was already there. But it has as well as hurt people who are just older, right? That their immune systems are compromised. People who have autoimmune issues and other compromised immune systems. It's terrible what has happened. But my point in saying this is it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of virus. And so it should not be a one-size-fits-all approach, despite the push to treat it that way. For the majority of us, it's an illness of some in varying degrees, but not one that requires hospitalization or certainly not the protocols that are being used in the hospitals when they could be treated. I'm going to get into that. When you be treated, it's just, even with severe symptoms, there shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think it's been made clear that the protocols given in the hospitals that have been overriding the discretion of the medical staff, which has truly been happening. If you didn't hear that my last episode, go back and listen to Tracy, who's a nurse in New York, all through COVID, working the ICU with patients on ventilators. The protocols were overriding the discretion of doctors and nurses, and pharmacists, were told don't fill these treatments, the treatments for symptoms, like ivermectin and some of the other ones that are available at a pharmacy, right? And how that cost the lives of those patients unnecessarily, people that could have been saved. We have 100 million people is what they're estimating in the US who have had this virus. 100 million, that's so close to a third of our population. You could argue between 25 and 30%, right? We've had approximately 600,000 people die. Yes, a tragedy, terrible, avoidable if the virus had not been released, right, and spread all over the world, but it's going to spread. It's going to continue to spread all over the world. It's going to mutate and have variants spread all over the world, which it's looking like they're going to be, while more infectious, less deadly, right? Depending on your health, I would say, but less deadly than the alpha. Let's just say that is what it looks like, which is the normal course. But 100 million, 600,000 deaths, you're talking about 0.06 or 0.6 mortality. So 99.4% so far, with rough numbers, 99.4% survival after you've been infected. Once you've been infected, 99.4 on average across the board, all populations. You get to my population, where 50 healthy, 99.998% likely to survive. Yeah, we can't treat everyone the same. We can't approach this one size fits all and think that that's going to make things better. Now, since I've had it, I have the antibodies, right? I have the antibodies, so I have natural immunity. That's great for me. And who knows if another variant will come by and make me a little sick, but who knows? But I have the antibodies. The odds are even greater in my favor of not having a severe symptoms if it comes through my system again. If I come in contact with another variant, I've got antibodies that are better than, and I'll get into this, explain this, better than they're more complete than from a vaccine. So why would I need a vaccine?. So I had the, I did have the IgG versus the IgM antibody test you can get at a local pharmacy. Not very sophisticated. It's a pinprick, a little bit of blood, 15 minutes, it's ready. And I had the faint, that was funny. I wasn't expecting this because I was just looking to see, hey, just curious. They have these antibody tests, didn't know the degree of certainty or reliability of this test, didn't know what I would see because I haven't really been sick, right? And I never had tested positive for COVID. I've actually tested negative. Shortly before this test, 10 days before this test, I had tested negative. But there was actually a faint, very faint line. So you have these little lines between IgM and IgG. IgM mean you're in current state of infectiousness, right? You might be contagious. You probably have symptoms. IgG is the antibodies that might show up 6 months or 6 weeks to 3 months later, showing that you've got it, but you're not currently sick. And you can show both. But I actually had a very faint line on the IgM, super faint. I mean, you could barely see it. You had to squint to see it, but it was there. The pharmacist who did the test saw it, who does these tests all the time, saw it, and was basically saying I had active COVID. And I mean, I hate to laugh, but you should have seen the look on her face, on the pharmacist's face. It's like, she looked at me like I was radioactive. But I'm standing there symptom-free. I'm wearing a mask because that's what you do when you go in that area for that test. You put on a mask. And that was fine. But you thought I had 3 heads, I swear, like I was glowing, you know. So her eyes got up. I mean, it was just kind of like I was doing everything I could not to react back. Like, I'm just fine. You had no idea that I had no symptoms, nothing that would show I was sick, right? Well, like I said, I had a negative PCR test 10 days before. When I was leaving Costa Rica, I had to get one to leave Costa Rica to come back to the US because it's a hot spot. And so the day before, afternoon before flying out, took the test, negative. So I didn't pick this up in Costa Rica. I probably picked up going through the airports, went through the San Jose airport, then to Miami International, where I spent way too much time there, just trying to get to the next flight to Nashville. And I mean, if I picked it up, it was probably there. Shortly, about 5 days after I got back, I went near a livestock holding area and then developed like a stuffy nose and some serious sinus drainage. And I thought, okay, I probably had an allergic reaction to something in that livestock area where I'm just kind of got a stuffy nose. And the sinus drainage, you know, it was no fever. I basically used Flonase, saline, some decongestants. Kind of felt like it might have been going towards a cold because it was just it got to like 1 or 2 days, it got severe stuffy. But I mean, I worked out 2 of the days, the first 2 days, and fasted my usual 24-hour fast on the 3rd day. And I was kind of, like I said, pretty stuffy. So I canceled my in-person appointments on the 3rd day just because I didn't want to risk, if it was a cold, sharing my cold with a client. That's just normal protocol for me. I don't want to share a cold. If it's allergies, it's not a big deal. You know, that's not contagious. But I was feeling like a bit more than my typical allergies, but again, no fever. Hindsight though, symptoms, you know, think back 5 days after returning, after, you know, going through an airport, that kind of makes sense in hindsight, right? In addition to the IgM test. But so I say I worked from home. I'd worked out a couple of days from home. So it really wasn't, it's not like I was feeling terrible. I just had this sinus stuff, which is, I mean, if you know anything about going to Nashville, if you didn't know you had allergies, come to Nashville, Middle Tennessee, and you'll discover whether or not you have allergies, because if you've never had them before, you might still develop them here. But by the 4th day, felt good, went back to work, little residual sinus sniffly, but not like stuffy, super stuffy nose. Again, felt fine. Energy was good. And then I got the antibody test a couple days later, and I was shocked. Now, I'm assuming it was during this time that I went through the airport that I showing these antibodies, because, again, it was showing the IgM. I really hadn't had any kind of anything that seemed like I was sick or cold or allergies since maybe October, the previous year, October 2020. This is August 2021 that I had this. So that was the only other time I'd had it. And again, it was allergy, cold-like symptoms, stuffy nose, some, bloodshot eyes, a little one, just a little, allergy type stuff, which is, again, common here, to have flare-ups like that. So again, no fever, at that time. So those are only 2 times in the last maybe year and a half that I had anything that might have slowed me down, that I could think, okay, that was like COVID, unless it just passed through with no symptoms, these were colds, but I don't think so. So this is my assumption. Because I had the IgM, I assumed it was recent. So I got a more comprehensive antibody test. It shows levels of the N and the S proteins. If you don't know about those, I would look for those. If you think you've had it, or you want to be able to show that you've got antibodies or show you've got natural immunity. It's a blood draw. It takes maybe 24 hours to get the results back, depending on who you go to. Found a chiropractic office that was doing it, offering it. And they show the nucleocapsid protein, that's the N protein, as well as the spike protein. The vaccines only give you the spike protein, they give you the S protein. So if you just had the vaccine, you do the antibody test, you'll see the S, you won't have the N registering. It has to register above 1, right? You go from 1 to 250, 300, whatever, depending on your viral load, the dosage, how long it's been. Sometimes it can increase from the time that you have it, it can go up and then come back down and remain. But anyway, if you've had COVID, you have both the N and the S proteins, the nucleocapsid as well as the spike. And during this time, no one in my house got sick. No one in my house got it for me. Again, it was 3 days of some symptoms, and I was, making meals. I worked from home quite a bit with coaching calls, podcasts, social media. I mean, since then I've ordered a prescription of ivermectin just to have around, just in case someone in the house does get it. I ordered from pushhealth.com. It's a good resource. You'll put it online. But, it's about managing, to me, it's just about managing those symptoms, right? And again, I didn't realize I had it at the time. So I just managed symptoms with, like I said, Flonase, some saline, some decongestants, avoided dairy, kind of stuff you do when you have allergies or a cold. But now we see countries like Norway, Sweden, and Denmark to date have lifted all COVID restrictions in their country. You can say, oh, they're 67 or 70, 75%, whatever, vaccinated. Well, they're saying the US is close to 60% vaccinated, right? Norway's treating it like the flu. Japan just announced they're going to be lifting all restrictions, I think October 11th, which is just, as I'm recording this, a couple weeks away. Japan, who, I mean, if there's a flu going around, they wear masks anyway, right? They're lifting all COVID restrictions. El Salvador is having success with treating symptoms with ivermectin and other meds, supplements. Actually, there's several, Guatemala, several Central American countries. Brazil does not have a vax mandate in place, so they're using early treatments for symptoms. They have no plans. It was the president or the representative at the UN. It was a UN announcement. No plans for vax mandates. They're using treatments for early symptoms. The president used treatments for early symptoms for his when he had it. India sent out home treatment kits to their citizens with ivermectin, doxycycline, vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, to tens of millions of them. And currently have a much lower death rate than the US. These done like maybe 300 a day, whereas we're like 2,000 in the US. So Peru had great success with ivermectin when they had it in place when they had an administration. There's actually a study on it, and I don't have that linked here, but I think when they were using ivermectin, they had an administration, basically a president, who was all about using ivermectin. And for the 13, I think they had, for the period that they use ivermectin, I think their death rate, severe symptom, maybe in hospitalization and death, maybe just the death rate, I honestly can't remember, dropped by 13 times, reduced by 1,300%, so 13 times lower. When a new administration come in and they stopped using ivermectin, or basically an administration that didn't push it, didn't promote it, death rate went back up 13 times. So recovered, basically. Okay, so as I said, yeah, Norway, Sweden have a high vaccination rate. You can argue that 67, maybe up to 80% they have. Who knows? But our current US president just said that things will go back to normal, in other words, lift these restrictions, when 97 to 98% of the country is vaccinated. He said that in a press conference. In other words, that's never, we're not going to have, that's not going to happen. You're not going to have 97, 98% of the country vaccinated. That just doesn't make sense. We've already had, like I said, about 100 million people in the US have had COVID. They certainly don't need it. They've got natural immunity, like me. 97 to 98% would include the majority of children who don't need it. Don't need it, right? They really don't. Their immune systems are fantastic. This is about this is about the effect of someone's immune system or a compromised immune system. We don't need a one size. 97, 98% is pretty much a one size fits all approach, isn't it? Vaccinate, 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 everybody. Now, many countries, if not most countries, can't afford mass vaccination. They don't have the cold storage, transport in place. They can't make that work. And many of them don't want to sign the contract with the pharmaceutical companies that shifts the liability to the government. In many cases, it restricts the disclosure of side effects, which we saw was true with the contract with Israel. And they don't want to afford, they can't afford it. They can't afford to pay initial, let alone the continued boosters, as these vaccines are shown to be leaky or not last long. If you have to have boosters every 6 months to a year, they're going to keep paying that ongoing indefinitely. Why would they do that when they can get treatments that are much less expensive, less side effects, proven, less harmful from a risk perspective, to control the symptoms and let everybody just get their immunity, and then they don't have to worry about boosters. They have their immunity, right? You write it out. And so from what I've read, even when Comirnaty, which is the one that Comirnaty is the version of the Pfizer vaccine that got FDA to approve their BLA, their biologics license application. They got that approved, right? And yes, the formulation is the same as Pfizer's current vaccine, but it's legally a different medication because they had to change the name. And so it's got its own set of testing. They did not get approved for kids because they're still testing for the risks, I guess, with people under 12, I think 12 to 16 as well, for pericarditis, myocarditis. Those are still risks that they're testing. Scheduled out through 2025, maybe 2027. But even when Comirnaty, which is the one that got the BLA application approved, which today is not available in the US. I don't know if it's available anywhere else, but it's not in the US. But I believe even then, Pfizer still won't have liability for it. All that was shifted to the government. Liability shifted to the government. So I would imagine that there would be many vaccine injury lawsuits against employers and schools that mandate this, because who else are they going to sue? Currently, good luck suing the government, getting that to work. I don't think that's worked yet with the previous medications that have been shifted to government. Liability, you've got to have the government to agree. Good luck. Yeah. Maybe, but I doubt it. But currently, the vaccines that are available are all under a EUA, right? Emergency Use Authorization. Now, that's not the story being spread, because once the community got the approval, the application approval, everybody started treating it like it was the same, but they're legally different. And that same day, the 23rd, that they approved the BLA, they also reissued their letter that Pfizer Vax is still under emergency use authorization. Now, you may not know this, a lot of people don't, but federal law prohibits mandates or forced use of a medication under an EUA. You're not supposed to have any use of coercion. The person who's receiving the medication should be informed of all the risks and impossible unknown risks. And they're allowed to accept or deny use with no risk of loss of benefits. In other words, you can't tell them if they don't take this, they're going to miss out on a benefit, or like losing your job, no campus access. You can't come to school here. You can't complete your program. You can't come to work here. Yet, as of this morning, I'm recording this, 70,000 healthcare workers are being fired in New York because they wouldn't take the vaccine. Now, I personally know 3 people have been injured by the vaccine. One with Julaine Barr. I'm probably mispronouncing that because I never say it right. Julaine Barr. One who 7 months pregnant when she had the vaccine. 2 days after getting the vaccine, she went into preterm labor and was bleeding. Of course, entered the hospital. They got things settled down, but still, that's scary. And who knows, what was going on, what the effect was. It could have been temporary. Let's hope it's temporary. Let's hope it was just an immediate but acute, limited response of our immune system to that vaccine. But it's still not like, why would you want pregnant women taking the vaccine when you have that kind of even acute response? Why would we normalize that? Why would we say, oh, it's okay, oh, it's not a big deal? Really? Yeah, 2 days after preterm labor and bleeding. Another friend has had to have her gallbladder removed. She from the time she got the vaccine, she had digestive issues, and her doctor said, this is probably from the vaccine. We need to remove your gallbladder to fix this. Now, who knows what the mechanism is there? I don't know. But there were no problems before after vaccine. There were. And again, my last guest on our last episode, Tracy Gannon, a nurse from New York, during her time there in New York, when she's working through over this last year, she knows 4 nurses personally that she'd worked with, 4 nurses who died from the vaccine. They did not have COVID. They'd worked through COVID without the vaccine, right? They got vaccine, they died. 4. So that's her story. We're hearing more and more of these injuries. If you aren't, I don't know. I'm hearing more and more. I'm hearing them every week. I've had people reach out to me because of what I'm posting, telling me what's happened to them as well. People I know, some I don't. It's too many. It's too many to say these are just safe and effective and great for everybody. We have nurses who worked through COVID with no vaccine. And now they're being required to take it or lose their job. That's, I think, which are doing, again, 70,000 this morning in New York alone. And they want to bring in the National Guard to replace them. Good luck. Good luck replacing a nurse with someone from the National Guard. Nothing is National Guard. It's just not what they're trained at. They're not what they're trained in. Some of them might be, but honestly, when you have a shortage already, and we have maxed out hospitals, why would you fire people who obviously have natural immunity? That's one of the main reasons Tracy left New York. She's got tired of dealing with it, moved to Florida, hoping she can work and help people without these ridiculous restrictions. And that risk where they didn't approve Comirnaty for underage group of 16, excuse me, because of the increased risk of myocarditis or pericarditis, which is inflammation of the tissue around the heart, that's pericarditis, or myocarditis is the inflammation of the heart muscle. That's actually a risk for everybody, as well as clotting, blood clots, or excessive bleeding, depending on where you are, disruption of menstrual cycles. There's enough risks. There's enough risks to go around. I don't think anyone's hearing these risks disclosed to them before being required to get the vaccine, now, are they? Are you hearing them from your employer or the school that's asking you to do it? Doing hearing those risks when it's being delivered to you, when it's being injected by the nurse? Now, the nurse is giving it to you is probably not the one requiring it of you, but the person requiring it of you, definitely the entity requiring it of you, should be disclosing these risks. And then by law, again, federal law, giving you the choice of informed consent without risk of loss of benefits. Of course, there's cases arguing this point about mandates being unenforceable under an EUA federal law all over the country. And I've actually have a copy of a case of a nursing student suing the university's nursing school right here in Tennessee because of the vaccine mandate. It's public record. It has excerpts of federal law and the FDA letter saying there are no approved vaccines. For each of the 3 available in the US, they are not approved. They're not FDA approved. They're all under emergency use. Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, and as well as their letter in a press release restating that the EUA is still in place for Pfizer BioNTech vaccine. And I've included a link to the FDA letter stating that Pfizer's vaccine emergency use authorization has been reissued as of August 23rd. It actually says, and there's several versions of that letter. You can find this one's dated September 22nd, 2021, so just a few days ago. Having concluded that revising this EUA, is a quote on September 22nd, having concluded that revising this EUA is appropriate to protect the public health or safety under section 564 blah, 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 of the Act, FDA is reissuing the August 23rd, 2021 letter of authorization in its entirety with revisions incorporated to authorize for emergency use the administration of a single booster dose of Comirnaty or Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. So that is linked in there. So basically, not only is the Pfizer, original Pfizer vaccine under EUA, that is actually saying they've authorized for emergency use administration a single booster dose of Comirnaty or Pfizer. Again, Comirnaty is not available yet. When and if it does become available, it's apparently, according to this letter, the booster is still under emergency use. Read it for yourselves. Am I misinterpreting it? I don't know. It sounds pretty clear to me. Read it for yourself. I've linked to it in the show notes. In both press release and the FDA letter. So everything is a risk. You have to weigh your risk to benefit ratio for getting vaccine or not getting vaccine. For some, that may go beyond getting COVID, because their jobs or education are on the line. They may not want to risk their jobs and education, even though if those were on the line, they may not choose to get it. But if they choose to get it because they need to keep making a living, and that's the risk they're willing to take, it's a shame that they have to make those choices. It's a shame they have to include their jobs or education when making a health decision like that. But that's the situation many have been put in. And for some, again, just depending on the state of their immune system, their metabolic health, they need all the help they can get to reduce symptoms. So the vaccine may be an option for them, right? Because we know it just reduces symptoms, right? For others with a strong immune system and metabolic health, riding out the virus, which we'll all get it eventually, it may be less risky for them than an experimental vaccine. That was my choice. I figured I had less risk with COVID than I did with the vaccine. And now I have the antibodies. However, there was a study done just this year from Italy. I'll link to it in the show notes again, but it was basically titled, and this was the conclusion: central obesity, so thickness of the waist, right? Which good sign of visceral fat. Central obesity, smoking habit, habitual smoking, and hypertension are associated with lower antibody titers in response to COVID-19 mRNA vaccine. That's the title of the study. Again, it's from Italy this year, published study. You can look it up. Again, link to the show notes. But it shows. So if you don't understand what titers are a test you can take to show you have antibodies for something. You take an antibody test for titers for any vaccine that you've had, with measles, mumps, chickenpox, right? All those things. Nurses have to get those to show when they enter nursing school, maybe to work in a hospital, to show they have the titers for all those vaccines. So when they test these titers in people who are either have it, you don't have to have all three. They did for each one: central obesity, smokers, and then people with hypertension. In each case, their titers were lower compared to people who had normal, or normal weight or normal body fat. We'll call it. They probably used waist to height ratio or a BMI, right? Smokers to non-smokers, hypertensive to normal blood pressure. And in response to all who had the vaccine, and those with central obesity or smoking habit or hypertension, all had lower titers in general, on average. Okay, I won't say all had. On average, because I don't know exactly what all the studies' findings were. So let me rephrase that. On average, their titers were lower than those who did not have those metabolic conditions or the smoking habit. So I think it's interesting that the vaccine manufacturers don't have any risk in this. Interesting is a kind word of saying it. They aren't liable for vaccine injuries. And again, looking at their contract with the government, they won't ever have liability. So they create the vaccines, they carry no risk, they get incredible profit. We've seen just one of them, what, 39 billion. I think it was Pfizer. Up to $39 billion now, payments from governments. Pretty nice deal for them. We're seeing studies in various countries that the infection rate is beginning to, especially with the variants, the infection rate is beginning to match the vaccination rate. In other words, both vaccinated and unvaccinated are getting it with no difference in the rate between vaccinated and unvaccinated. If you have a population with, like we saw in Massachusetts with a study, 69%, 70% are vaccinated, then the infection rate of vaccinated to unvaccinated is exactly the same. 60% of those infected are vaccinated, 40% are unvaccinated, or 69 to 31, whatever it is. There's no difference. It matches the population vaccination rate within a certain percentage point, depending on what their survey was, right? There's a study of a Vietnamese hospital staff that were all completely vaccinated, and they were all infecting each other. They traced it to, they weren't all getting infected outside, they're being infected from within the hospital with each other, their contact with each other, and 100% vaccination. Now they have a very high COVID infection going on right now. It's terrible. They're on high alert. But what the study showed was there's no difference in viral load between vaccinated and unvaccinated. The viral load was the same. So they have the same level of infection and they have the same ability to spread it. The only difference is maybe their symptoms. Their symptoms might have been lower for the vaccinated than the unvaccinated. Okay, not a reason to force people to get it if it just affects their personal symptoms and they can still spread it and get infected. I'm not sure why everyone needs to be if that's what we're seeing, especially with the Delta variant. I'm actually going to include a link. This is not my opinion. Okay, it's not just me coming up with opinions. I include a link to a professional assessment by Nina Pierpont, who's an MD, PhD. Her credentials are footnoted in the assessment, looking at that study, one in Massachusetts, the Vietnamese hospital, and then one in UK, which includes about over 1,900 people. What she's saying about, we're about 93% of the Delta variant is what we're dealing with, which is currently in the US, right? It was about 93%, most of what we're seeing. And so the vaccine mandates, basically, her assessment is the vaccine mandates are pointless. They do not keep people from catching the Delta variant and passing it to others. Delta variant doesn't care about your vaccine, that you had your vaccine, doesn't. And Lambda, right on the way of Delta, right? Sorority sisters, Lambda, Mu, Delta, Lambda, Mu. Lambda isn't expected to be much different other than being, less inhibited by the vaccines. So if anything, it's going to be less. The study, I read a quick study. It was a short one, has not been peer reviewed, I don't believe. But it doesn't appear that's going to be, it appears it will be less inhibited by the vaccine than Delta is, not just than Alpha, than Delta. So vaccines are going to have less of resistance, or create less resistance to spread and infection of Lambda as well. So, but check out that assessment. It's linked in the show notes. Very insightful. She's got her credentials are impeccable. I think she did her undergrad in biology at Yale, did her master's, PhD in Princeton, and her MD is from Johns Hopkins. She actually taught for a while at Columbia University's pediatrics School of Medicine. So, and she's in private practice now. So she's got impeccable. She knows how to read a study, or three in this case, and make an assessment. Certainly worth listening to her or reading her assessment. And she does warn that maybe these schools and employers who are mandating these vaccines might want to lawyer up, because again, the injuries from the vaccines, the risk from the vaccines might start to outweigh the benefits. It looks like they are, if they're primarily ineffective. And who else are you going to sue? You can't sue the manufacturers. You're not going to sue the government and expect to get much out of it. You're going to sue the person who told you to get it, or with risk of loss, right? Risk of loss for your job or access to the campus or whatever it is. That's who you're going to sue. So I received that from, I'm going to give credit to Paul Saladino for sending that out in his newsletter, his email. It's excellent. It's excellent, well written, and it's definitely worth your time reading. But again, it's linked to it in the show notes. She does actually mention as well that PhDs are the largest vax hesitant group. If you look at percentage of, yes, they're a small percentage of the population, but if you look at their percentage compared to other levels of education or degrees or non-degree, they're actually the most, as a percentage, largest vax hesitant group. So there's no liability of manufacturer or the government. How do we justify a mandate without liability to someone? Even though it reduces symptoms in many people, I don't know how much of a difference it made with me, but hey, we can't speculate that. It's not reducing infection, spread. It's not limited with the current variants. Okay, may have with Alpha, but not with the current variants or expected subsequent variants. And the claims, we have claims that we've all heard. The effectiveness of the vaccines is determined by the people who don't take it. In other words, that's why we all have to be vaccinated. because it's not effective unless everybody's taking it. That's why we have a mandate, right? That doesn't seem logical to me. I would love someone to explain the logic behind that. I don't even understand how they can say it with a straight face, that the effectiveness of the vaccines is determined by the people who aren't taking it. It'll be more effective if everyone's taking it. Okay. Does it reduce the severity of symptoms for the person who takes it or not? Because at this point, that's the only claim left. That's the only benefit left. And one would think, especially by looking at the study, that would be determined by the immune system of the person that's infected. Even with a study that showed the titers are reduced even in vaccinated people based on the quality of their immune system or the state of their immune system. This really should be each person's choice, each person's risk to take whichever way they choose, because each of us has to live with our choice or die with our choice, right? Reality. Live or die with the choice, with the side effects, with the long-term effects. So whether you choose to get the vaccine or take on COVID without it, I would hope that each of us would support that freedom to choose. Right? For each of our friends or family members, people we come in contact with, support people in the right to choose based on their own assessment of their risk to benefit ratio with it, right? Without disparaging that on a personal level. But we can do that. We can support the right to choose that and still oppose a mandate, whether you've had the vaccine or not, whether you choose to get the vaccine for your personal risk profile or not. We should all be opposing a mandate to take an experimental medication that has its own risks to our health, that comes with its own set of risks. That's a choice only a person can make for themselves or possibly for their child, if they have children. But to make that choice for another person, to mandate that, and then to leverage their job or their education program against them to get them to take this when it's possibly risking their health. In any case, they're choosing risk for their own health. To use their means of personal support, what they're trained in, what they do for a living, or how they're getting trained to make a living, against them to make this decision in the form of a mandate is morally wrong. Have a great week.